Joining us to talk more about the crisis in Ukraine is Jorge Benitez, an expert on international security. George, we've had you on the broadcast before. We've talked about this issue. It's complicated. It's not easy. It looks as though there may be a shift as far as the United States is concerned in terms of providing arms in Ukraine. What do you think the likelihood is of that?
I still think it's unlikely. I think there's a consensus building within the Obama administration among the senior leaders. We've seen shifts, particularly in John Kerry and Susan Rice. They're more willing to examine the option of sending weapons to Ukraine. But I think the key element here is President Obama himself. He's the one that has to cross that river and make the decision of whether he is comfortable with taking this policy option.
If it happens, what would be the reaction from Russia?
I think you're going to see a lot of condemnation. I think initially you're going to see some escalation militarily. But I think if we do this in a significant way, in a way that provides Ukraine a way of increasing the cost militarily to Putin, I think he'll back off, because I think that's what he's been waiting for. I think he's been pushing wherever he sees weakness, but as soon as he sees some opposition by a united international community, I think we'll start to see him back down.
That can be the perspective from some people here in Washington, D.C., and yet when you get into Europe, it seems as though there are different points of view. Angela Merkel of Germany feels a certain resistance to this, and there are some who say this can widen, that it could escalate further, it could engulf Europe itself. What do you think the risk is of that?
Well, I think the risk of that is what we've seen already. That point of view has been the dominant point of view so far. We've been trying their policies, and basically it hasn't worked. The more we try to compromise and give Putin the things he wants, he has continued to escalate. And even though we've been trying to find a negotiated, peaceful settlement with him, he has continued to use military force against the Ukrainians. So I think it's time for us to try another option and see what else we can do to change his behavior.
What, if you were to give advice to the President of the United States, what would it be? In terms of arms, what would your suggestion be?
Well, I think it's not just a question of sending arms, but of sending a strong political and military statement. In addition to the sanctions that we have right now, I think we need to have a true multinational response to this, so that it won't be just the U.S., but also many of our NATO allies will also provide military equipment and training to the Ukrainians, because in addition to the weapons, they also need a lot of training.
Now, do you feel as though the U.S. and NATO have done enough to show support for Ukraine at this stage, and what more can be done?
No, I think the United States and NATO have done the least that they can so far. They've played a strong diplomatic game in trying to say that they provide support and encouragement for the Ukrainian people, but I think it's pretty clear that the Ukrainian people right now are being attacked by a bully, by Putin and his military, and that they need more substantial and tangible aid, not just from the U.S., but also from the European allies that are much closer to Ukraine.
One of the things I ask you every time you're on, because this is an ongoing story, what are some signs or signals we should be looking for in the weeks, months ahead, do you think?
Well, I think we should definitely see Putin has moved a great deal of weapons, advanced weapons, and a greater number of Russian troops themselves. There are reports that the Russian troops that are in Ukraine right now are not making as much of an effort to conceal their identity. So we may see more of a revelation or a smoking gun that there are Russian troops in Ukraine fighting against the Ukrainians.
At the final analysis, though, that there has to be some type of diplomatic solution at some stage. But you think showing some muscle will lead to that?
Well, I think we've been dragged into this situation because of Putin. While Obama and Merkel and others have tried to find a diplomatic solution to this, he has tried to solve this militarily by increasing his military gains on the ground and gaining more and more Ukrainian territory. So until we stop that, we won't be able to bring him back to the negotiation table.
All right, Jorge Benitez, always a pleasure having you in on the broadcast. Thanks so much for stopping by.